I'm going to go over some of the principles that I like to follow when I'm doing street outreach, and hopefully be able to educate and inspire some of you guys, just kind of simplify the technique, help you realize it's not really a script we're trying to follow. It's more of just an anchor that you can always use to kind of, if you get lost in the outreach, come back to, so that you can effectively communicate the message we're trying to convey. First thing I want to touch on is active listening. So when you're on the street or in person or talking to somebody, it's always important to make sure that they feel heard. This will be able to help make sure that they're actually going to be engaged in the conversation, and also make sure they're not getting too defensive. Make sure to reflect their views back at them if they are letting you know that they think we should be respecting animals, or whenever they take a stance. It's always good so that you can re-say what they said to you in different words to make sure that you actually are understanding, and then also allows them to feel like you are actually listening. You're not just kind of waiting to respond. And then the last thing is create dialogue. So if they are feeling like they're being interrogated, you want to make this feel like a discussion and not so much an interrogation. Imagery and stories. So people are emotionally driven by stories and imagery rather than facts and statistics. It's always better to just keep statistics to a minimum. It's really hard to know if these statistics are 100% accurate. Maybe you're using a statistic and that happens to be a person who's an expert in the field that you're speaking to, and they might have a different perspective. When you're on the street, this is a simple topic of justice. We don't have to try and complicate it with numbers. And it's a lot harder for you guys to try and memorize stats, but know that you can go out there, keep the conversation simple, and not need to have all of these statistics memorized. I know like a lot of YouTubers and activists have a lot of these statistics memorized, so when we're watching these videos, it makes it an impression that we have to go out there and have all these things memorized. But I just want to reassure you guys, even if you don't know any statistics, you can still go out there and be an effective activist. We're going to be on the street to plant seeds, right? And if at the very least, with somebody unreachable, the right seed that you want to plant is the seed that holds that person accountable. Right? If you can only get one line in before somebody walks away, or before you walk away from them because they're unreachable, all you want to paint is for them to realize that as long as they do not live by the vegan principle, all of these injustices will continue to happen because of them, right? That's the seed we want to plant. We don't want to be on the street just trying to educate or raise awareness. I mean, everybody kind of knows that this is happening, right? Everybody's kind of aware that we're treating animals poorly, right? So if we're only on the street to just tell people what they already know, I feel like it's probably not the most effective thing that we could be doing with our time. We want to make sure people understand that not only is this happening, it's directly happening because of that person, and they are directly responsible for it. That is the most powerful seed we can plant. And that way, maybe every time they do sit down for dinner, or every time they do buy that jacket, somebody has told them, oh yeah, like I'm responsible, like there is a victim at the other side. And maybe that seed will grow in actually getting some kind of change. So using storytelling techniques, especially when you're trying to paint a picture for what the animal is going through, placing that person into that position with a story. You could use a story something like, imagine if you were like locked in a basement and you had like everything you could ever want, and all your food and all your money was taken care of, and you were living this happy life, right? Would it be an injustice that you didn't really know that something bigger and greater was on there on the other side, right? So now you've painted an image or a story to what it would be like, for somebody who's not really sure that there is a whole life on the outside, and they're kind of trapped in this cage, right? So keeping your composure is also a really important one. Your body language, when you're talking to the person, make sure that you're using an open body language. Usually your hands behind your back is really good. Be looking at them at least in the eyes when they're speaking to you. When you're speaking back, it's You can be looking around, but make sure you are also looking at the other person. And be respectful. You want to be respectful, one, to the person that you're talking to. Language and that is going to be really important. The second is to be respectful to the victims that you're representing, right? Make sure that you are representing them in the best way that you possibly can. And a good way that I like to remember is how would I like to be spoken for if I was in that position? So at least defending the animals how I would want to be defended if somebody was speaking up on my behalf. And then you want to be assertive, and this is important because it helps you keep control, and it helps keep the conversation serious. The outside public is only going to take this problem as seriously as we take it, so we want to make sure that we represent that perfectly. And to stay non-defensive, keeping confidence, right, remaining calm is going to show that you actually are serious about what you're talking about. And also, if they get defensive, it becomes really hard to be able to really communicate with that person. This is where I see a lot of activists kind of get lost, and this is what I find leads to most of the mental health breakdowns that I've noticed. Does anybody here agree that justice is not up for debate? Yes? Does anyone? Okay, awesome. So justice, in my opinion, is not up for debate. So when we are on the street and talking to people, we want to make sure we're not engaging in a debate, right? Debates can be very draining, and justice is pretty simple, and it's quite black and white, right? Some people might try and get intellectual with you, but we don't need to intellectualize the conversations. We want to just keep it very simple and to the point. Ways that you can bring back the control. Like say you're maybe talking to somebody and they are kind of veering off topic every time you present them with the reality of the injustice they're responsible for. If they are making excuses, one way that you can always bring it back is asking the question, are you open to being wrong? This allows you to gauge whether the individual is just set in stone, they're even open-minded, right? If you're not talking to somebody who is open-minded, you're just going to be burning yourself out, right? And this is going to be one of the principles that I'll go over, but make sure that you're able to at least bring the control back to yourself. Don't let them keep asking you questions and make statements. Try and take back control. Yesterday, there was a guy at the Cube. He was kind of drunk and he was trying to ask us all if we knew what hand and mouth is. I don't know what it is. Foot and mouth disease. And I asked him, like, no, I'm not from here. I don't know what it is. He explained it to me. Then I was trying to now inform him about veganism and what it meant. And he didn't want to hear what I had to say, right? I didn't want to have this person just yell at me. And so that's when I understood, okay, I'm not going to be able to control this conversation. I just walked away, and then he got really angry and upset. But that's on him. I can't control that. A good way also to make sure that you're keeping control is to repeat questions that you ask. So if you're asking somebody, do you think that we should be respecting animals? If they kind of go on a tangent, you can come back and ask the question again. So it's really important that when you are asking questions, you are getting answers and not getting trapped in them trying to lead the conversation in different directions, right? And this is something I had to practice a lot, but just keep this in the back of your mind as well. Because what it could look like if you're in a conversation and you're asking, well, do you think we should be respecting animals? And they all of a sudden start going, well, in my country, we treat them differently, right? They didn't answer your question. And now you might go into this realm of going down this conversation of different countries and different treatment, right? And then you'll get lost, right? And so if you just bring it back, be like, I asked you a question, do you think we should be respecting animals? If that person doesn't want to engage in the conversation with you, again, that's probably a sign that maybe this person isn't reachable and it's not worth having a conversation with them. And like I said before, keep it simple. The animals are being exploited. This is a big injustice. We don't need to be making it about anything else. And avoid distractions. So when they go off on tangents, when they start talking about things that are irrelevant, bring the conversation back. Be like, look, I'm not here to speak up on this topic. I'm not here to speak up on that topic. I'm here to represent the animals. If you don't want to do that, then we don't have to continue, right? A lot of people will try and take to different injustices or focus on, things that aren't maybe relevant, but not necessarily to the animals. So make sure you're not going in these directions. And again, what they're trying to do is deflect away from their responsibility and their accountability on this topic. So it's important to make sure you're becoming aware of these when people are trying to veer away. And then when it comes to dismissing nonsense, again, if somebody is trying to bring up something that is kind of irrelevant to the question, like, treatment in a different country, I kind of just ignore it rather than answer it because it is irrelevant, and then usually come up with another question. Like if I ask somebody, are you against animal exploitation? And they start talking about how in their country it's a lot better, I will just repeat the question in a different way. So, do you think that we should be respecting animals? And then, at least get them to make a stand so that they understand that I'm not here necessarily talking about the how animals are treated, but I'm talking about why they're being treated that way in the first place. So it's always important when you're going into a conversation to have some kind of structure. There's lots of different methods and techniques and types of activism that you can do, but make sure that you have some kind of foundation that you're using so that you don't get lost in conversation, and you have at least something that has been tried and tested and it does work. This is a really big point I want to hit. Don't waste your time, especially when it comes to burnout. There's probably, a lot of people who are ready and willing to listen to this message. I don't know about you guys here, but when I heard this message and I made the connection with the injustice, I went vegan on the spot. Right? I didn't know what veganism meant. I didn't know the severity. I didn't even realize that I was participating in this subconsciously. And so there are other people out there who are like me and probably like you, who are just ready and waiting to hear that message. If you find that somebody is unreachable, don't waste your time, because that other person could have stopped there beside you and waited for 10 seconds and then left because nobody talked to him, right? So if you're wasting your time with somebody, you may have missed that opportunity to have the conversation with somebody who actually was open and reachable. And what we do want to keep the focus on is why, not how. So the problem isn't about how the animals are treated. It's not about the conditions and the welfare, right? It's why is this happening on the first place? And holding that person accountable, making them understand that they are the reason this is happening, and if they want this to stop, then they have to change, right? And this topic, animal rights versus veganism and vegan activism. So, does anybody here feel like the word vegan has this kind of stigma to it in society? Right? Does anybody avoid using the term because of that stigma? Some. So imagine as vegans, if we refrain from using that term because there's a stigma attached to it, how other people are going to view that term, right? And so as vegan activists, it's our duty to, one, represent that term as best as we possibly can, because it's the only term that the animals have that will and is fighting for their liberation, right? So if we can't defend that term, how is anybody else going to take it seriously? And what I noticed is a lot of people actually doing vegan activism, but doing it under the guise or under the title of animal rights activism. So what is the difference? One way I'm going to ask this question is, does anybody here not harm another human being or not exploit another being because that human being has rights? Or do you not exploit and harm that person because they are a sentient individual? So if you think that you don't harm these other humans just because they have rights, put your hand up. Right? So nobody put their hands up, right? It's wrong to treat animals and humans in that way because they are sentient, not just because they have rights. And so when we take this back to slavery, there was activism that was done first that was to change the minds of people so that they no longer viewed slaves as property, right? And so before they could actually advocate and fight for legal rights for these slaves, they had to get a lot of people on board and change their minds and make them understand that, you know, these humans deserve just as much rights as every other human being, right? And so vegan activism focuses on that mindset, right? Most of us here, whether animals had rights or not, we would not be using them as our property, as commodities, or as slaves, right? If you're talking to somebody and you're trying to just get them to, you know, talk about their beliefs and their core values, you could ask them, like, do you believe that animals deserve rights? But not a lot of us are doing that, right? We're more asking, do you think it's wrong to view animals as objects, right? And I think this is very important for us activists to go back and really defend the term vegan activism, because that is what we're doing. We're trying to change people's minds. So I mentioned this earlier again, focus on exploitation, don't entertain discussions about treatment or welfare. And for example, like we used to use the word abuse. It is kind of powerful, like when you ask a person, are you against animal abuse? Nobody wants to be an animal abuser, but, and not saying don't say the word abuse, but abuse kind of baked into it has this meaning of misusing someone, right? So when you're talking about misusing, you actually paint the fact that there might be the right way to use somebody, right? And that's where I noticed when I was talking about abuse, people always kind of went, well, there's a good way to do this, or there's a humane way, right? And I didn't realize it was because I was actually the reason that that conversation was going in that direction, focusing on treatment, focusing on humane. So when I switched my language to exploitation, then there's no right way to exploit someone else. So mental health, I've touched on it a lot. The program I'm about to go into has a mental health care program baked in, but it's up for you to stick to those principles so that you can protect your mental health, right? A very important thing that we use at AV is the 3 strikes, you're out. So if you notice your person you're talking to is keep on bringing up excuses, and they're doing it in like a non-genuine way, there are people who, you know, generally don't really understand that you can get iron on a vegan diet, or, you know, they really don't understand certain topics. And if they're receptive, maybe you can go into like more than 3 strikes. But if you get 3 objections right away, probably that person isn't reachable, right? And so focus on the people who are reachable. Again, there are lots of people out there who are just waiting to hear this message, right? And that will be huge for you to just be able to move away from that person. Sometimes the most powerful message that you can send to somebody is that today a vegan wasn't going to put up with their nonsense, right? Because, you know, they're trying to suck your energy and try and play this mental game with you. And as long as you realize that this person is not worth my time, I'm going to stand up for myself and walk away. You know, it does take practice, but it's a really powerful thing to do. So I'm going to go into the principles. We just spent 1 month in Amsterdam, 31 days straight, 9 hours a day on the streets doing activism. And that was a huge case study for us. There was over 400 or 500 activists there. We were constantly like iterating and evolving on the flowchart and these principles, testing what works, what doesn't work. And this is kind of what we have found that was very effective. Even after 1 damn month, we were traveling around Europe. So we did, I think, 7 or 8 weekends, really big actions, at least 10 to 20 hours on the street per weekend in a different city, and applying this, and we'll still continue evolving and learning more and more. And so with this model, we're open to feedback and we actually recommend it. If you think that there's a way that we can improve this, we're all here for the animals, and that's what this is all about. And so we want to be making this as best as possible. So what I'm about to present to you comes from hundreds of activists all around the world coming together to essentially build this out so that everybody can use it. So the first principle is to qualify the individual. And the question that we like to use right now is, so how do you feel about humans exploiting other animals? And this question, we now are making it about feeling rather than thinking. So some of the questions used to be around how do you think, now we're going with how do you feel, right? When you talk about feelings and emotions, right, you're really getting to that person. You're not trying to intellectualize this conversation, because people can think their way out of stuff really easily. But when it comes to feelings, it's hard to really lie about what someone's feeling about, right? And then one thing we added to this question as well at the end is, how do you feel about humans exploiting other animals? And that's to emphasize that we're setting the conversation around the treatment of non-human animals by humans. That there's a distinction there, right? Because we already had established here that everybody does believe that the animals deserve a movement that's focused solely on them, and this allows us to make that distinction. And so this question sets the stage. It allows the person to kind of talk and think about and reflect on this topic of humans exploiting other animals. And it assesses how deep the individual grasps this injustice. So based on this person's reply, you'll be able to get a lot of information from them. And then gauge, are they ready? Are they willing to challenge their beliefs? And are they open to having this conversation with you from a genuine and honest perspective, right? And the goal is also to establish the conversation around the topic of exploitation. And exploitation is the root cause of all of the other injustices that we see, like violence and cruelty and killing and abuse, right? If you focus around exploitation, you address all of the other injustices as well. And so if you were to focus on, let's say, abuse, and if you stage the conversation around abuse, for example, some people might not view it abusive to have like rescued backyard chickens that are laying eggs, right? But we know that's still wrong and that's still exploitation. So when you use the word exploitation, you use that as a foundation. You cover all of the industries and you cover all the ground. So the last thing is, this is the entry point to challenge misconceptions. So they might quickly come up with some misconceptions. You can define what exploitation means so that they understand. And a really simple way to explain exploitation is just using an animal for any purpose. So you qualified the individual. When they answered your question, if they said something along the lines of, yeah, it's wrong. What did they do? Sorry. So they answered in a way that kind of indicates that they feel like it's wrong, humans shouldn't be exploiting animals, or it's sad. And that person has at least passed step one, and you know that they're somebody who's willing to have this conversation with you. If they quickly go into like some kind of talk about human supremacy, or like, yeah, animals exist for us, or they feel no emotion, it's probably not worth going into the rest of the conversation, and save yourself the time. So we're going on to question number 2, and this is where we establish their core beliefs. There's a lot of different ways that you can ask these questions as well. Personally, I like to ask the question in the form of, do you think that we should be respecting animals? Or do you think that animals deserve respect, right? Or even better, do you feel, not think? And that way, however the question comes to you, I like to focus on respect. You can also ask, do you think it's wrong to exploit an animal? But it kind of like paints it in a negative perspective where people are more likely to be agreeable on, a positive framework. Respect is a good word, and it is essentially the lack of respect that leads to exploitation. So if you're asking the same question, you guys can use whatever flavor you want to put on that question, but this is the principle behind it. So when you bring to the surface their ethical beliefs, it builds a foundation. And throughout the conversation, when they are making any kind of contradiction, you can bring it back to, oh, you already said that we should be respecting animals, so how would you feel if that was happening to you? Would you feel that was respect, right? So that's why it's really important to actually get them to answer these questions, because every question has a purpose, and this is how we build upon, right? So you want to establish if they believe that non-human animals deserve moral consideration, and focuses the conversation, again, about the animals. This is what we're here for, and it forces a clear moral stance from them. So once they have taken this stance, it also makes it harder for them to really justify any of these injustices, and you can bring it back. So principle number 3, so you've asked them, do you think we should be respecting animals? They say yes, of course. This is a good sign that they're worth now coming to principle number 3. If they kind of make us some excuses or are already getting really defensive at this point, again, it's probably not worth having this conversation, and don't feel shy to disengage. So this question here is going to be to point out the contradiction and the dissonance that the individuals face, and to expose the hypocrisy. So most people do want to be respecting animals. They do understand that animal exploitation is wrong, but they haven't really made the connection that this is a big contradiction for them internally. And so if they understand that respect cannot coexist with exploitation, then they will feel this internal contradiction, right? They'll be now confronting this dissonance within themselves. I don't know about any of you here, but for me, this was essentially the turning point. As soon as I realized that I was a hypocrite and I was saying that I love animals, but here I am exploiting them for so many different reasons, I had to look myself in the mirror and make that decision. And that decision happened instantly, right? It's something that a lot of people out there who've never actually really been confronted with and faced with, right? So this question is really powerful because it might be the first and the last time that they are ever confronted with the hypocrisy. So now we've got all the information from them that we can use to build this conversation around. Now we kind of have to take the other step and start building the foundation for how we are going to start providing information and a solution to them. So next, we define veganism. We ensure that they understand it's not a diet, it's not a lifestyle, it's not an identity. And this question is just a simple one. It's, do you know what the definition of veganism is, right? And the purpose of this question is to just understand. I mean, everybody that I ask this question to will say something along the lines of, yeah, it's somebody who doesn't eat animals, or it's somebody who doesn't use animals and doesn't wear their skin, right? And so we want to essentially address this misconception that it's some kind of diet or just about some practices, right? We want to establish that it is a moral stance. It's an ethical principle, right? And so this is the question that allows us to kind of address those misconceptions in the public, right? If we don't address these, I mean, I still have a lot of vegans who tell me that vegan is just a diet, and I don't really know, I don't really blame them, because all the information out there, even if you just Google definition of veganism in the Oxford Dictionary, it's just a diet, right? And so we have to, as vegan activists, address this, make sure that even if that person doesn't go vegan today, they understand what vegan really means and what it is, right? And so make it clear that it's not a personal choice, it's a clear stance against oppression. So what is veganism? Veganism is a movement, and this term vegan was defined in 1951 by a man named Leslie Cross. He kept the definition really simple and really clear, and that is the doctrine that man should live without exploiting animals. This language is pretty old. We don't really use these kind of terms anymore. You can define it that way if you'd like, but the way I like to define it is an ethical principle that humans should live without exploiting other animals. And that also indicates other animals. So however you like to use your version of that, but make sure that it sticks clear to this specific message. And Leslie Cross also defined the objective of the vegan movement very clearly and very simply, and that is to end all animal exploitation by humans, right? So one thing that I found, there is another definition by the Vegan Society now, and it goes into reducing harm and cruelty and as much as possible and practicable. And personally, I still can't memorize that definition. And so when I learned about how simple the original definition was, it was really powerful for me to use that as my foundation for my activism. And when I started having the conversations and explaining this as the definition, I was shocked at how receptive people were to understanding what this actually means. So I'll give you an example. There was a conversation I was having online, and this guy had worked in the crop farming industry, and he used to actually collect the dead rabbits and have to sort them and separate them. And he sent me this big paragraph about how vegans are hypocrites because they're still killing other animals, and so they're still causing harm because of crops. And I pretty much just told him hey, before I respond to you, can we agree upon one thing? This is the real definition of veganism, is that we as humans should live without exploiting other animals. He said, oh, that's what it's about? Okay, well, I agree with that. And then from there, he actually dismissed all of his arguments that he was presenting to me. And we actually had an open conversation from there, right? So it's important that we also play to people's intelligence, right? We don't want to assume that they're not smart or they're stupid and have this kind of negative connotation towards how this conversation is going to go, right? But when we keep the conversation simple, when we have a strong foundation, when we know what that foundation is, when it's crystal clear, that's when we can actually dismiss a lot of these arguments as irrelevant because they don't actually apply to the right and the real foundation, right? So most arguments, I found even if somebody is bringing up lions, right? When you see, okay, it's about humans should live without exploiting animals, veganism is not about how lions are treating other animals or killing other animals. And so I also realized that a lot of the arguments that people are coming up with, especially from the carnivore community, are probably because they're reading that longer definition. It has words like cruelty and words like harm in there. And so they're actually formulating these excuses which are kind of maybe somewhat in their mind genuine because they don't fully understand what veganism is, but they hear that definition, and that's where these arguments come out. So my mental health has just had so much improvement when I'm focusing on a strong foundation. I know what my foundation is, and I don't have to answer all these questions that aren't even within the scope of what the movement is seeking to achieve. So now we've defined veganism, we have a foundation for the conversation. The next thing we want to do is determine someone's character, right? In society, we judge people based on what they do, not necessarily what they say, right? So the question here is, do you know what the #1 benefit of going vegan is? This also allows us to explain what the real benefits are. It also allows us to dismiss any misconceptions that the benefit is anything for the human, right? It's not about health, it's not about environment, and so we get to explain that the benefit for them is that they'll no longer be a hypocrite, they'll be living in alignment, right? They'll be actually telling the truth when they're saying that they believe we should be respecting animals, and they're actually acting within that. But we also get to paint the benefit for the animals is that they're going to be liberated, now from that person and their oppressive mindset, right? It's important that we paint that as the main benefit, right? And once you present this to them, you'll be able to test their character. Are they open to this? Are they understanding, and are they willing to agree? Because if they are willing to agree, now you know that this person is actually fully reachable. They have heard the message, they understand that they are the reasons it's happening, and now they've kind of understood the moral imperative that vegan is the right side to take for justice. So now this person understands that vegan is the moral imperative, it's the moral obligation, and it's time to find out how serious they are in actually making this change today. And so usually everybody has a lot of objections, and it's our responsibility to at least try and address some of those right then and there. And so with this, I like to ask, is there anything preventing you from living by this vegan principle? Or is there anything stopping you from going vegan today or making a change today? A lot of people, this will be the first time they really think about this. So the most common kind of objections that you might have is like, well, I don't know if it's healthy, or I don't know if I can get all my nutrients, or it might be expensive, it might be, inconvenient, right? For example, I'll ask somebody and they'll say, well, I'm from this country and it's really hard, and they'll probably list off something. So then I can now choose to either reply to their statement, teach them how to get protein, teach them how to, get all the nutrients they need, but that's going to take a lot of time for me. I'm not saying don't do this, but before you go into educating that person, ask them, if that wasn't a problem for you, if I could solve this problem for you today, would you go vegan right now, right? This is the last way that we can really identify, is this person making genuine excuses, or is this person just kind of trying to, deflect away from their responsibility again, right? So if I ask this question, if this wasn't a problem, or if I gave you a solution, would you go vegan today? Usually they will say, yes, I will. But maybe they'll say, well, also it's really expensive. And then from there, I will ask, okay, so you're saying you don't know how you get your nutrients, and you're saying it's expensive. Is there any other blocker, right? So you want to gather all of these blockers that they might have, and then once you have them all, now they've essentially told you either if you can answer all these questions, they will go vegan, or if they're not going to, it might not be worth it for you to spend all the time answering and teaching this person and providing the information that they might need. And so what you could do is place them back into the victim's position, right? So if you were, let's say enslaved or trapped or about to be killed for food, and imagine somebody was fighting for you, and then the person was making all these excuses. And let's say they used all these excuses, like they didn't know how to get their nutrients, it was going to be really expensive. Like, would you think all of these excuses are acceptable to justify doing any of these, putting you through any of these injustices? So what you've done is you've showed this person that all of these excuses are not acceptable.
Right? You can teach the person how to get the protein, you can teach them how to find cheap alternatives, but now you're focusing on the how and you're not focusing on the why, right? So always bring it back to the why, show them why their excuses aren't valid, right? And maybe you don't know how to answer some of these excuses, or maybe you don't know how to provide them with some of the information, right? But what all of us can do, and what all of us understand, is that there is no acceptable excuse for delaying this, as we mentioned on the first questions that I asked earlier. So you can waste the time in trying to educate, but at least the least you can do is ask them the question, put them in the victim's position, and make sure they understand that there's no acceptable excuse. And from there, just you can let them know, like Google, ChatGPT, they can use all these resources to help figure out the how and go from there after they figure out the why. So now we have to highlight the urgency and the severity. So, asking questions now like a viewer, do you see this as an injustice? I kind of touched on it in the previous slide, but this intensifies the urgency. So, by placing them also in the victim's position now, if you were in this position, how fast would you want this injustice to end? We are able to really put them in that position, use the stories, make them understand what it feels like for the animal. One question that I really like to use, that we kind of been using since Germany, is if you were the animal, what would be your one wish to humans? And that really gets them not only in the position of the animal, but now thinking, what would this animal want, right? And the answer is freedom, liberation. That's what they would want, right? And then the quick, easy follow-up question is, and when would they want that? Now. And it's a really powerful way to ask the person to go into that position and understand the urgency and the severity by saying that they would want freedom and they would want it now. And then, now you're reaching the end. They understand the imperative. They understand that the liberation and freedom is important. And they understand that it's important that it happens now. And now it's time to provide them with a solution. So what I will ask them at this point is, how many animals do you want to be exploited because of you after today? And most people by this point, if I've gone through with them, they will answer 0, right? And that shows that they understand and they've confirmed that the whole conversation has kind of reached them. And now the solution is for them to go vegan, right? So after they say the number 0, sometimes they won't say the number 0, but they might say, well, I want to try to make it 0. We can bring it back to the previous principle, make sure that we're, again, addressing the severity, placing them back in the victim's position. But after they say 0, the easiest and best follow-up question is, so vegan from now. And then that is the only way for them to truly live if they want that number to really be 0. And that's your opportunity to really establish that with them and get them to understand that. And it challenges them to recognize that anything less than 0 is a betrayal of their ethical beliefs, because they already said that we should be respecting animals at the beginning. They already agreed that animal exploitation is wrong. And you really get to hold them to that.